Welcome, everybody. Coming live from New York, Doola HQ here, right next to Madison Square Park. If you're in the area, maybe you can come by for a future live. We are live today, and today's topic is one of my favorite. I actually mean that, and that's because I geek out about LLCs and C Corps and what is the difference. So I'm actually going to give an answer here because typically if you go online, and I've heard this line from entrepreneurs, you get migraine inducing information on what should you actually do. There's maybe this, and then there's edge cases, and then a lawyer might tell you 11 things you shouldn't do, but you just want to know the one thing you should do. So my goal today is to answer this question, and I'm going to answer it so you can walk away with an actual answer. And the specific question is, how should you determine if you should file and form an LLC or a C Corp? And we'll also touch on this thing called a sole prop. We might even have some fun and talk about S Corps too. So all this can be confusing. There's lots of acronyms and names. We'll define the acronyms and I'll also just give you an answer. Now, I love the live chat. So if anyone has questions live, whether it's about this topic or other, drop it in the chat. I prioritize those. It's always fun to have a live convo with someone. Yes, we're virtual. Yes, people are tuning in globally, which is actually why we do these events at 11:30 Eastern, because then you get a bit of West Coast at 8:30 p.m. You get Europe about 5 to 6 hours ahead, and then you catch India IST time zones about 12 and a half hours ahead. So full global time zone coverage. We're going to hit everyone. We're going to hit all these topics today. So again, jump in the chat if you have questions, but let me start off with, let's actually start by backing into why this is so important. And there's this concept I like I first heard this from Amazon, from Jeff Bezos, around type 1 and type 2 decisions. And you can think of it as a door. So let's say there's a door, and if there's a door which you can walk in, and then if you decide you don't like what's on the other side of the door, you can turn around and walk back out. That's a type 2 decision. It's easy to think of because one is you're going in and then two is you're coming back. But let's say there's a door and you can only go into the door and that's it. No turning back. That's type 1 because you've gone in that door, and I hope Narnia is on the other side, or maybe it's Hogwarts, or you're in a place you actually enjoy. That's type 1. Now, the point of me sharing that is that in life, type 1 decisions have bigger implications. There's no turning back. Type 2, you should make as many of those as quickly as possible. And if you're running a business, you should actually empower the team to make those too, so you're not the bottleneck. For type 1 decisions, though, you should be involved. The reason I give that story, think of the door, think of type 1 versus type 2, is starting your business and determining the structure is a type 1 decision. Now, the asterisk I will add there is technically there's ways to roll back or change or make adjustments, but there can be major downstream consequences for making the wrong decision here. So this to me is a type 1 decision with an asterisk, a small asterisk, because we'll get into this. You can technically convert an LLC to a C Corp. You could dissolve the entity, create a new one. You can technically start as a sole prop by default and then form. Point being said, though, is you should think very intentionally about this. Now, I don't say this to scare you. I say it to add some seriousness. This is an important topic, and getting it right ensures when you go through that door, you see Narnia or Hogwarts on the other side and not, not a place you don't want to be. You can think of the least favorite place you want to be and then some magical place you'd like to be. So with that, let's dive in. Let's start with, by default, if you are starting a business, you are a sole proprietor. That's just the default classification of someone who is running a business without an entity. Now, here's what I'll say. You notice how this title here says, should I file an LLC or a C Corp? It doesn't say, should I be a sole prop? Because here's the thing. If you have any semblance or any bar or any level of seriousness about your business, very candidly, and I'll be blunt here, it doesn't make sense to be a sole prop. To me, there's a bar of how serious you are about it. If you truly are just like, hey, I'm going to mess around here and it's not really a priority, then sure, I guess by default you'll be that. But if you have any semblance of seriousness about generating some revenue, which most people want to do with a business, and I'm not talking about hundreds of thousands or millions in revenue, even if you want to do a couple hundred a month or a couple $1,000 a month, you should form an entity. There's just a level of seriousness in your bar. So that's the first radically blunt feedback I'll give is A lot of people should maybe ask, hey, should I even do this in the first place? And what I would say, again, is that with a sole prop, it's not really demonstrating a level of seriousness beyond minimal hobby. And the other thing I'll add here, and this will now get into the reasons why an LLC or a sole prop can be powerful, or sorry, an LLC or a C corp can be powerful, is you're not going to have, and let's get into now what these terms are, liability protection or legal protection. So let me paint this picture of you're a sole prop and you start a business. And a very popular type of business that folks will do on e-commerce is they might do drop shipping, or they might just actually start an e-commerce business in the health industry. So that could be supplements that they want to sell, it could be skincare, it could be a little massage vibrator tool, whatever it is. Now you're starting the business, your TikTok creative or creatives are cooking, your Facebook ads have a 3x return on ad spend, things are cooking. But then let's say there's a defunct order, or let's say someone's using your massage device and when they're plugging it in, they shock themselves. I don't know. I'm coming up with some scenario here. These are black swan downside scenarios. You could get sued. Now, the odds of this are very low, but in life, things like this can happen. And if you're a sole prop and you do not have an entity or liability protection, what happens is your personal assets are then at risk. Now, again, I'm painting a downside scenario, but the way I view this is you could pay a couple $100 to sleep peacefully at night knowing you're protected there. And what an LLC, and let's actually define these terms, an LLC is a limited liability company. It creates this corporate veil, if you will, or separation between the business and you, even if it's just you. And what that means is, in the downside scenario case of a lawsuit or litigation, the business is separate from you. Your house, your assets, whatever it is, are separate. Now, if you don't have that separation, God forbid, in some lawsuit, your personal assets could be at risk. And I don't know about you, but I'd want to keep those things separate. For a couple $100, you can have this peace of mind. You can block off this downside scenario effectively. So that's my take there. I'll just recap here. I'll be very blunt with folks. I want to give people an actual answer. If you have any level of seriousness, you should not be a sole prop. And again, it's okay if you don't want to start a business too. Not every person has to. That's not my point as well. But if you want to go anything beyond minor hobbyist and you actually want to give this a try, again, the worst case is you go through and do this and you dissolve the company in a year or two, and you at least gave it the proper try. Now, let's get into LLC versus C Corp. The name LLC. Let's do a little history lesson. Does anyone know where the LLC was invented? Wyoming in the 60s, 1960s. So the LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. And again, it's a way to create separation between you and your business. Now, a C Corp is a C corporation. It's a different type of entity. Now, one of the most common questions I get asked, doula gets asked, is, okay, I'm moving beyond this hobbyist level. I want to give this a spin. I'm going to take this seriously, this business. And actually, before we get in, we'll talk about the benefits. But before we get in to how an entity can actually help, one of the biggest psychological edges you'll get is that level of seriousness comes from you've taken action and actually create this entity. So I think even if you don't have a business plan yet or a website, just going through that action sometimes can be the nudge you need to say, hey, I got my certificate of formation. It's time to give this a real go. So again, you don't need that to actually go out and talk to customers or build a website, but I do think it can be powerful together. So let's get into LLC versus C Corps. A couple comments coming in here. First off here from Elisa, thanks for sharing. Of course, if you have any questions, chime in the chat. We love the live chat. Then we had a question that came in from Peak of Internet. What's up, Peak of Internet? I recognize you. Thanks for tuning in. What about multiple LLCs owned by a Dubai holding company and owned by me? Okay, my question here would be, we're going to talk about what type of entity to start. Is there a question here around taxes or bookkeeping? If you could clarify specifically what you're looking for in terms of the structure here. This sounds cool to me. Like you own multiple LLCs, awesome. You've gone beyond the hobbyist level here, and you have a Dubai company, so it's cross-border international. So that sounds very cool. But if you could clarify exactly what question you have, is it about structuring? Is it about compliance? I can try to help, or maybe someone on the team can. So let's come back. LLC versus C Corp. A lawyer tells you 11 things you shouldn't do. I'm going to tell you the one thing you should do. Here's the easiest way I would answer this question. And let me actually just pop this back on the screen as well. For most people in the world, and I'm actually going to answer this with a story because I'll admit the story. It's a bit embarrassing to share now, but this is actually what I used to think. I used to live in San Francisco, and my commute to work. I used to live I lived in a couple different areas, but at this time I lived in Alamo Square or near Alamo Square. That's where those painted ladies are from that show. I think it's Full House. I should know that. But those colorful houses, they're on postcards. They're the famous ones. People sit in the park and look at them. I would start on that hill. I'd have a bike and I'd bike down. And here was my commute to work. It took 17 minutes if I remember. I would go down and then I hit Market Street. And on Market Street, I would pass this company called Uber. And then I'd pass this company called Twitter, now X. And then I would take a right on Second, and then I would pass this company called LinkedIn. Probably heard of it. And then I would go down the street and there were new startups popping up left and right. And then I would take a right on Brandon Street, which is where my office was. I worked at Dropbox. And then down the street, I could see Airbnb and Pinterest. So you've probably heard of all of these companies. But the reason I share that is that was my commute every single day. And as I did this commute, my worldview was I'm going to admit this, my worldview was these are the only types of companies that you can start and should start. They're these moonshots, massive consumer, it could be B2B companies, but these massive companies that have raised millions of dollars, have all started C Corps, have all tried to raise money, many of them gone through YC, and that's the only path to starting a business. Now, I share that because there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, those companies are massive, have had huge impacts globally, changed the way that we live. Many of them have become verbs. Like Uber is a verb now. Airbnb is a verb. You Airbnb your place. You Uber to a location. Side note, our goal is doola becomes a verb too, to launch or level up your business. But the reason why I share this is because my worldview was to start a business, you have to raise money, get a Delaware C Corp because that's required by investors, and we'll get into this. But here's the truth. 99.999999 add more 9% of the world is not raising venture capital. They're just starting an entity and either bootstrapping it or it's profitable from day one. Maybe you take some funds in, but you're not looking to raise millions. You're not applying to YC, although I'm a huge fan of YC. You're not raising venture. You're just building the business. It's a side hustle. So the reason I share that is because, and this is the answer to the question, it's actually quite simple. If you are raising US venture capital, if that's the route you're going down, and I can give some guidance on, hey, when would I recommend it makes sense to do that or not? Form a Delaware C Corp. And that's because it's required by US investors. And the reason why is because it is easier to actually administer stock or equity or shares in a C Corp. Now, a C Corp has different taxation too. There's a corporate tax, and then you pay an individual tax. But overall, it's required by investors, and it's easier to structure stock, equity, shares. If you're not going down that path, this is actually my simple answer. If you're not going down that path, form an LLC. Liability protection, much more simple and easy to maintain. There's no board meetings. It's flexible. There's tax flexibility too. To update the operating agreement, it's an internal document. You can update it, edit it. No need to send an amendment to the state. And don't sleep on LLCs. LLCs have liability protection. They open up the access to American financial infrastructure, to banking. You can get credit, etc. You have an actual business. You have the liability protection. So that is my actual point blank recommendation. If anyone's on the fence out there, if you're raising venture capital, go with a C Corp. If not, do an LLC. Now, a couple of the most common questions I get from there. What if I'm not sure? If you're not sure, I'd start with an LLC because you can always dissolve that entity and form a C Corp in the future. If on the flip side, you are dead set from when you came out the womb, you were like, I'm going to start a C Corp and raise millions, then do the C Corp. If you really are dead set on, hey, I'm going to raise and pitch to investors, do the C Corp then. And also investors, when they eventually invest in you, they're going to need your bank account. So you'll need the C Corp to get your EIN to get the bank account too. So if you're not sure though, I would start with the LLC. You can always convert to a C Corp or dissolve your LLC and then start a fresh C Corp. But that's my point blank answer there. Again, it can be oversimplified. And the only thing I'll add here is if there are international founders listening, there can be certain considerations depending on the tax treaty between your country and the US as to where a C Corp or LLC might be better. So I'll give you an example here. And I don't want to generalize because generalizing means every person has the same situation. But for some founders in Canada, it can make more sense to actually form a C Corp versus an LLC due to how Canada and the US treat taxes. Now, it could be different, though, for a founder in the UK or Australia or Turkey. So if you are an international founder, this is where we recommend you can schedule a demo with Doola's team, and you can actually do this. And we're happy to answer any questions on the US side of things. But we always recommend that you chat with someone in your local jurisdiction. So if anyone does actually, I'll just do a quick plug here. If someone's listening saying, hey, you know what? I actually just want to confirm if an LLC or C Corp is best for me, or if I should talk to someone, or if Dula has a recommendation, you can schedule a demo. These are completely free. You can chat with our team. So if you've been on the fence, let this be the sign you're looking for. And ultimately, you can just confirm, hey, again, this type 1 decision, this type 1 door is an LLC or a C Corp best for me. Now, let me come back. We had a couple questions that come in, so I definitely want to prioritize these. Question here that came up from Jarir. Which YouTube channels would you recommend for young people wanting to be entrepreneurs? Okay, I'm going to give you my biased answer here. We have a channel at Doola where we put out a ton of educational content around all of these topics. Now, my question to you, Jarir, would be, there's lots of information out there, and I think there's some incredible YouTube accounts. It depends on what type of knowledge. So I'm a huge fan of the Y Combinator YouTube account. And that's because they talk about a lot of cool concepts which do apply to companies that have raised venture capital. I still do think, though, that there's a lot of good concepts there that can apply for anyone. How to find product market fit, how to prioritize, etc. So I would say check out the YC channel. I think it's pretty cool, but then I'm biased. I would also say check out the Doola HQ channel on YouTube. We have a ton of content there, again, on, call it the business formation nuts and bolts, but also things like how to scale your business, bookkeeping tips, etc. Another follow-up question here from Jarir. Which YouTube channels, books, or blogs have impacted your life the most? That's a fantastic question. Let me start. I'll actually go in reverse. I don't read that many blogs, actually. I do like books. So I'll talk about a couple of books that have been very impactful. And I can actually focus these on entrepreneurship too. Shoe Dog is a fantastic book just on what it takes in terms of perseverance and commitment within entrepreneurship. In terms of, let's call it the business specifically, a couple really good books: High Output Management by Andy Grove, Traction by Gino Wickman. Books which I think apply to business, but they can apply to life: Essentialism by Gregory McCown, Atomic Habits by James Clear, Getting Things Done by David Allen. There's a book called The Alliance by Reid Hoffman, really good read as well. Measure What Matters by John Doerr. These are a couple more pure business books that I've recently read that I really enjoyed. I also do think, my take is that fiction raises your ceiling and nonfiction raises your floor. So a lot of those books I mentioned are nonfiction books. They elevate the floor at which you can operate, but I do like fiction because I think it forces you to think bigger or think differently. So I do like sci-fi books. I like other fiction books too. Some of my favorite: Shantaram, Pachinko on the sci-fi side. Three Body Problems, incredible. Ender's Game is really good. Ready Player One is really good. I also just read miscellaneous other books. So I recently read this book from Michael Singer called The Surrender Experiment. I'm now reading a book called The Untethered Soul by him too. So I find these books interesting, and I think it's a nice way to take your mind somewhere else. And you find that when your mind goes there, you're able to come back and solve problems in different creative ways. Just 5 letters, action, and nothing else. I'm not sure. Is that a book? You can clarify. 5 letters, action. Let me actually double see if that is 5 letters. Oh, I see what you're saying. I love that answer. Okay, so this is the question was, which YouTube channels, books, or blogs have impacted you? Peak of Internet said the answer is 5 answers. The answer is 5 letters. Well, okay, hold on. Action's 6 letters. You might have to clarify with me. If the answer is like, hey, action's the answer, I love it because you can read and consume information. That can also be like a form of procrastination where you're just like hanging out doing stuff with an excuse not to do the work. You'll learn more from doing the work. So take action. I love that. Technically 6 letters. No, it's a book. You can clarify with me, Peak of Internet. But I do agree, take action. Read books and then take action. So let me come back to the topic at hand. I want to make sure that we cover just a couple of the other questions that come up. So to summarize here, LLC versus C Corp. I actually just hinted at that. But again, LLC, for most people in the world, if you're raising venture, do a C Corp. Now, a couple things that I'll touch on with regards to LLCs. LLCs, they're taxed via pass-through taxation. So what you currently make through the entity is going to get passed through. And then on your individual tax filing in the US, you pay taxes. If you're an international founder, it depends on the tax treaty, but it would still be passed through and you would pay taxes in your home country. Again, depends on the tax treaty. C Corps have double taxation. There's this corporate tax, and then you pay the personal tax. You both get liability protection, and in terms of ownership and management, C Corps are more flexible. LLCs are more flexible. C corps enable things like the ability to issue stock, easier to raise money because investors want to invest in that entity. LLCs are more flexible. I would say too, if you're raising venture, technically it's possible to invest into a C corp, but C corps are built for that. And then lastly, from a compliance perspective, LLCs are a bit more simple. There's more tax flexibility. There's no board meetings. C corps do have more complex requirements. There's bylaws. You need to keep more detailed records. So again, I'll just summarize here to wrap things up. If raising venture capital, C corp, else LLC. Very simple. That's how I'd actually describe it. Now, the last thing I want to touch on, a couple things, is let me give you a couple examples of what an LLC or C corp might look like. So an LLC, let's say you're selling t-shirts on Shopify or handmade jewelry on Etsy, or you have a pet brand on Amazon. All fantastic things for an LLC. Let's say you are a company that's building an operating system or a platform with a massive suite of tools for founders using software and AI, and you need capital to build the team and really invest and accelerate growth. That could be a smart play to actually raise venture capital because you can move a little faster there. You can attract talent. You can invest more in R&D and go to market. And there's things like hardware companies where you need the capital investment, or biotech companies. But usually VC is an asset class. Investors are looking for a return, which means there's certain growth expectations in a certain amount of time. So if that's the game you want to play, that's also something you should consider. Where if you go down the C corp raise venture route, that is the game you're playing, where an investor is expecting a certain level of growth in a tighter timeline. If you don't want to be accountable to investors and want to do it on your own terms at your own pace, then an LLC is actually probably a better choice on that side too. You can switch later. So I just want to state this. If you start an LLC, you can always switch to a C corp or dissolve the LLC and form a fresh C corp. And then the last thing I'll add is that if you're listening and you're actually interested in starting a business, we can help. We do this for founders all over the world, over 10,000 founders, 175 countries. And let this be the sign again, where you can schedule a free demo with the team. You can actually just visit us here. We're happy to answer any questions there. Now, to wrap up, I do want to touch on, yes, so this was coming around action, mental master. We won't say the full word. It's a way to procrastinate. Consuming information, again, which is good. But when I read a book, I like to apply it. If I watch a video, how can I apply it? That's where actually learning happens. Learning is behavior change. It's taking action, not just consuming. And then we had another comment here from Jareer. I emailed about a WhatsApp community. This is on the roadmap. So this is a fantastic idea. Stay tuned. This is something we're thinking through, and we want to be intentional about how we roll out a community like this. So fantastic idea, Jareer. And we think that's powerful. If you can take founders at different stages, different levels from all over the world, that's how you really level up. Now, the last thing I wanted to touch on, somewhat tangential, but it's a question that comes up, is okay, I understand LLC versus C Corp now. I get that's a type 1 decision. I understand the pros and cons. But what state should I file in? So I'll answer this very simply too. If a C Corp, it's likely going to be Delaware because Delaware C Corps are typically required by investors. And that's because case law in Delaware is standard. It's seen a lot of historical cases, so investors feel comfortable there. So that is technically the standard to do it in Delaware. Now, for an LLC, a huge mistake people make is they think it should be Delaware. And that's because Delaware has this halo, if you will, from C Corps. There's actually more entities formed in Delaware than people. But here's the thing. I'm going to answer this for the US founder or the international founder. As a US founder, if you form an LLC in Delaware, but you don't live in Delaware, you've just doubled your fees. And the reason why is technically, in the state you live in, you're technically doing business there. Because you're answering calls, you might have a physical office there, or you're just physically based there. So if I form in Delaware, when I live in New York, I now have to register the Delaware LLC to do business in New York. That's called a foreign qualification. And I need to get a registered agent and pay the annual New York State fees. So I just doubled my fees because now I have a registered agent in both states and state fees in both states. I should have just formed in New York. So if you're in the US, unless you have a strategic reason, which maybe depends on you doing business in the state or there's some tax structuring, you should form an LLC in the state you live in. Internationally, world's your oyster. You can actually choose any state. But I will give you a recommendation. You can choose any state. The two most popular we see from international founders are Delaware and Wyoming. Wyoming's actually more popular, and here's why. One, don't sleep in Wyoming. People call it the Swiss Alps of the Rockies. Number two, it's cheaper than Delaware. So the annual fee is a little over $60 versus for Delaware, it's $300. And then number three, Wyoming is actually a very forward state in terms of legislation, very e-commerce friendly. A lot of businesses are digital online these days. So as an international founder, most people go Wyoming. That would actually be my recommendation. But again, you can choose any single state. So I hope that was helpful. I just wanted to touch on that again. If C Corp, Delaware LLC. If LLC, if you live in the US, form in the state you live in. If international founder, you can form in any state, but I actually recommend Wyoming. Okay. Checking the chat here. Any questions though? Question from Peak of Internet. Is marketing the needle mover or technical? I have to tell you this story here, and we'll finish off with this. I was actually at a Y Combinator meetup in New York last month, and I got to meet our group partner, Aaron Epstein, for the first time in person. So he's known Doola for years. He's been one of our group partners. And I got to meet him in person for the first time. And when I was there, I told him this story of a line, which I'm never going to forget. When this was post demo day, Doola was actually called Startback at the time. We were just getting started. Few people at the time. And I remember thinking, holy crap, the product sucks. There wasn't even a product. We didn't have a dashboard. The flows were manual. So many things were broken on the product side. So let's call it the technical side. But then on the same side, it's like, wait, crap, we're not growing fast enough. We need to fix our paid ads. We're not doing any partnerships. And there's just so many things to do. And I remember thinking, wait a second, this is impossible. Like, what should we focus on? Should we focus on marketing or the growth or fixing the product? So I scheduled office hours. That's a little hack. You can get a ton of value during YC, but a lot of the value can come post-batch. You can schedule office hours with any partner. So I scheduled office hours with Aaron. I put this question here, and I was like, okay, not that I'm going to stump him, but this is a hard question. Like, I wonder how he's going to answer. Where should we focus on all these marketing issues or technical products? Like, this is where YC is going to provide a ton of value. They're going to help me understand exactly what to focus on. And we get to the call, and I start walking through the situation. And you know that face, you've probably seen it when you were in middle school or growing up and you did something wrong and your parents are just looking at you disappointed. It's like they're not mad. They're just disappointed. They're not angry. They're disappointed. And as I started going through this, I could kind of see him just starting to give that look, like that just disappointed look. And then he let me finish. I finished with, okay, so what should we do? And then here's his response. And I'm going to finish with this. This has been ingrained in my brain since then. His response was, the average founder looks at all the things they have to do and says, oh, we can only do one. Extraordinary founders, the best founders, they find 90-10 solutions. They do both. There is no if or. There's no we have to do this or this. It's we do both. We focus on product, technical, and marketing. We focus on growth and retention. And the answer is these 90-10 solutions where if you look hard enough, you don't need to launch a full affiliate program. You could email some of your best customers and say, hey, can you introduce me to someone and I'll PayPal you? You can come up with these hacks. These are 90-10 solutions where you get 90% of the learnings or the outcome for 10% of the effort. And that is how you do both. Because instead of doing 100% in one thing, you can do 10% in 10 things and get 90% of the output. And that is possible. You just have to really dig and think and descope and descope. So I'll finish with that. The answer to this question of is marketing the needle mover or technical? The answer is both. If you build it, people won't come. You need to actually market. But if you market and don't have the product, then you're selling snake oil. You need both and both feed into each other. Where if you have a powerful product, your marketing hook gets stronger. If your marketing hook is stronger, you attract more people who can then use your product. That's a flywheel. So thank you, Aaron. Again, you don't need to make trade-offs. Just find these 90-10 solutions. And then you have to prioritize, of course. So great question, Peak of Internet. Really enjoy that story. Again, average founders say, oh, it's either or. Extraordinary founders, extraordinary companies say, we can do both. We have to do both, and we'll 90-10 solutions. That is a wrap. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Fantastic questions that came in. If you have any questions, again, I'm available on social. You can schedule a demo at doola.com. You can visit doola.com. I also have a newsletter called the 2-Minute Business Hack, where I write and share a hack, an actionable hack every single week. You can scan this code, subscribe, head to doola.com and grab that as well. And I will LLC you next week. Thank you.